Tonight, we bring you an in-depth look at a major political and economic story unfolding from northeastern Pennsylvania, where President Donald Trump delivered a highly anticipated speech on the economy that has sparked widespread discussion and controversy. In that address, the president dismissed the concept of affordability as a political hoax, a remark that has drawn significant attention from voters, economists, and political analysts alike. Joining us to break down what the president said, what he meant, and how current data reflects the very real conditions facing Americans is our senior economic reporter. Thank you for being here. In his speech at the Mount Airy Casino Resort in Mount Pocono, Pennsylvania, President Trump took an unusual rhetorical turn as he addressed a crowd of supporters and voters. The event was billed by the White House as an effort to directly confront voter concerns about the high cost of living and to outline the administration's economic accomplishments and strategies. However, much of the attention from that speech has centered on the president's rejection of a commonly used term in economic and political discourse: affordability. Rather than engaging with the idea that many Americans are struggling to afford everyday expenses, the president characterized the focus on affordability as a hoax, saying it was a political construct, largely pushed by Democrats, and suggesting it was being used to mislead voters about the true state of the economy. Mark quickly became a headline and sparked debate about both his messaging and the underlying economic facts. So let's start with the president's words. During the speech, Trump said that critics who talk about affordability are promoting a hoax, and that prices nationwide are coming down tremendously from what he described as the highest levels in U.S. history. He also shifted blame for economic difficulties to his political opponents, particularly former President Joe Biden and Democratic leaders, asserting that their narrative of an affordability crisis is merely political rhetoric. This framing echoed lines he has used in other recent appearances, as he attempts to reshape the conversation around economic issues. At first glance, the president's claim appears to contradict the lived realities reported by many Americans, especially when it comes to daily household expenses. Despite declarations that prices are falling or that inflation is under control, the actual data shows that many costs remain elevated, and inflation continues to impact households across the country. According to the most recent Consumer Price Index (CPI) figures, inflation remains above the Federal Reserve's long-term target of around 2%, with a year-over-year rate that analysts place at roughly 3%. This indicates that prices for a broad basket of goods and services, from groceries to utilities, are still increasing compared to the same period a year ago. It's also important to understand what economists mean by inflation and how it differs from the idea of affordability. Inflation refers to the rate at which prices rise over time, reflecting how much more expensive goods and services have become compared to a previous point. Affordability, on the other hand, encompasses not only price changes, but also wage growth, household budgets, and the broader economic context in which families make spending decisions. Even if inflation eventually returns to or dips below target levels, many households, particularly those with stagnant or slowly growing incomes, can still feel squeezed because their wages have not kept pace with costs. Indeed, government reports and independent analyses show that while some prices, like gasoline, may have receded from peaks seen earlier in the year, other essential costs, such as housing, food, and utilities, have remained stubbornly high or continued rising. In the president's remarks, he also highlighted stock market performance, wage figures, and other indicators he believes demonstrates economic strength. He pointed to recent gains in the stock market, which he described as the only thing that is really going up big as proof that his economic policies are working for Americans. While stock market performance is often cited by political leaders as a sign of economic health, it does not always reflect conditions experienced by everyday workers. Many people do not directly benefit from stock market gains, and new data shows that wage growth has been uneven, with some sectors and income groups seeing modest increases, while others struggle to keep up with rising costs. Another element in Trump's economic messaging has been a defense of his administration's tariff policies. Over the course of his term, the president has imposed extensive tariffs on imported goods, which he argues strengthens domestic manufacturing and protects American jobs. However, critics from both sides of the aisle have pointed out that tariffs can raise the costs of imported goods, leading to higher prices for consumers. Independent estimates suggest that, on average, American households may be paying between $1,600 and $2,600 more per year because of tariff-induced price increases on a wide range of products. These elevated costs can counteract gains in other areas and contribute to the perception that life has become less affordable. Sales-in market also tells an important part of this story. After mortgage interest rates peaked near 8% in 2023, they have fallen somewhat as the Federal Reserve adjusted its policy stance. Despite this, mortgage rates remain significantly higher than they were a few years ago, roughly double the levels seen under 3% in 2021. Higher mortgage costs translate to higher monthly payments for new home buyers, making homeownership less affordable for many families. Meanwhile, home prices have shown signs of leveling off, but rental costs continue to rise in much of the country, placing additional financial pressure on households that rent rather than own. At the same time, the labor market, which had been extraordinarily tight in the wake of recovery from the COVID-19 recession, has shown signs of softening. Unemployment rates, which dipped under 4% during previous administrations, have inched upward to around 4.4% in recent reports. This shift suggests that job growth may be slowing, and private employers reported shedding tens of thousands of jobs in the latest available data, too. While unemployment remains relatively low by historical standards, the slight rise combined with persistent inflation can erode household security and contribute to a feeling of economic vulnerability among workers. Given this mix of economic indicators, the question becomes, how do average Americans perceive their economic situation? This is where poll results and public sentiment measurements offer critical insight. A newer PNORC poll showed that President Trump's approval rating on the economy has fallen to a record low of approximately 31%, marking the lowest point in his economic approval during both of his presidential terms. This decline reflects mounting frustration among voters, even as the administration seeks to reassure the public that inflation is under control and that affordability remains a priority. Additional polling data reinforces the picture of widespread concern. In a recent Politico survey, a significant portion of Americans, including many who supported Trump, described the cost of living as among the worst they have ever experienced. These same surveys found that more voters attribute responsibility for persistent inflation and high prices to Trump's policies than to those of his Democratic predecessor, Joe Biden. Even though Trump campaigned on the promise of economic management and cost reductions, these assessments suggest that public perception doesn't always align with the more favorable economic messaging offered by political leaders. So why did the president choose to frame the topic of affordability as a hoax? Part of the explanation lies in political strategy. In recent midterm election cycles, Democrats have made affordability and cost of living issues central campaign themes, winning several state and local contests by focusing on kitchen table economics. Republicans, including the president, face pressure to counter this narrative and reassure voters that the economy is strong. By challenging the term itself, Trump may be attempting to deflect from criticisms that he has not sufficiently addressed everyday financial pressures. Analysts suggest this tactic aims to change the frame of the conversation from whether prices are high to why voters believe they are high. However, critics argue that dismissing affordability concerns outright overlooks the concrete challenges many families face. Consumer advocacy groups and political opponents have pointed to rising costs in key areas like groceries, healthcare, utilities, and transportation as evidence that the economy is not yet working in the favor of average Americans. For example, utility prices have climbed significantly in some regions, with reports showing double-digit increases over the past year, a trend that runs counter to claims that affordability problems are overstated or purely political. These rising costs hit households directly in their monthly budgets and are experienced viscerally by consumers, long before broader economic indicators are widely understood. The debate over affordability also has roots in broader discussions about economic equity and growth. Supporters of Trump's policies highlight trends like stock market strength, wage growth in certain sectors, and job creation as signs that the economy is fundamentally healthy. They argue that structural reforms, deregulation, and tariff policies will ultimately benefit the U.S. economy. Yet, economists often caution that gains in headline indicators such as corporate profits or market indices do not necessarily translate to improved living standards for all segments of the population, particularly lower and middle-income families who spend a larger share of their income on essentials. Beyond the immediate economic data are the political ramifications of this messaging. With the 2026 midterm elections approaching, economic conditions and voters' perceptions of their personal financial situations are likely to play a central role in electoral outcomes. Historically, voters tend to hold incumbent parties accountable for how the economy feels at the kitchen table, not just how it appears in economic reports. If voters continue to express dissatisfaction with affordability and blame current policies for their financial struggles, that could shift political momentum, particularly in swing states and competitive districts. This dynamic partly explains why the administration felt compelled to stage a high-profile event focused on affordability in the first place, even if the underlying message was unpredictable. It's also worth noting that the president's broader rhetoric at the event was more expansive than just economic points. According to reports, the speech included remarks on immigration and other contentious political issues, drawing criticism from some observers who saw it as a diversion from the economic topic at hand. Critics argue that veering into unrelated political grievances during a speech billed as an economic address undermines the administration's effort to credibly address voter concerns about cost pressures. Proponents, however, view it as a return to the rally-style political communication that has been a hallmark of Trump's public approach. At the heart of these discussions is a simple but powerful fact. Many Americans continue to feel economic strain, whether it's the rising price of milk, rent increases, or higher utility bills. For them, the daily experience of paying more for necessities can outweigh statistics about inflation slowing or wage increases in select sectors. That reality underscores the challenge for any leader, whether Republican or Democrat, in bridging the gap between economic data and lived experience. When voters feel financial pressure, their trust in official narratives can erode quickly, making political messaging all the more difficult.